This is Fifth, and you're watching the ExJW Fifth YouTube channel. I'm very happy today to be joined by Dr. Alice Clearman Fusco. She's a clinical psychologist and someone who is very knowledgeable about groups such as Jehovah's Witnesses. So, Dr. Fusco, I know your schedule is very busy. I really want to thank you for carving out some time to speak with me.
It is my pleasure, and call me Alice.
Okay, all right. Well, Alice, first of all, I would like to ask you a little bit about your background. Could you give us some insight into that?
Yeah, sure. I first became interested in cults when my friend's older brother joined a cult called the Moonies, and now they're called the Unification Church. And they were a lovely family, really nice, very smart people. He was very smart. We were maybe 14, 15, and he was in college. He was recruited into the cult. He literally disappeared, terrified his parents. He sold all of his worldly belongings as a college student. It's not very much. Gave it all to the real father, they called him. And he married someone in one of those big group marriages, weddings, and moved to South Korea, and begged, that spent his life begging and reproducing, had lots of kids, begging for money and food and so forth. And it was so weird to me as a kid. I couldn't understand it. And the times that he did come back, he told us we were all going to hell because we were in the wrong religion. So that sort of stuck with me. And then when I became a psychologist in my early college days, there was a flurry of news stories about cults. A woman named Patty Hearst, who was the heir to the big Hearst newspaper family. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she joined a cult and she ended up on video on all the news channels robbing a bank or photography. I don't think they had video then. And as far as, surveillance. And then there was a guy named Reverend Jim Jones, who I don't know if he was actually a true reverend, took his crowd to Guyana because in America the government was too annoying in investigating them, and he convinced those people to drink Kool-Aid laced with cyanide when a senator went to look at what they were doing. And that's where the term drinking the Kool-Aid comes from. They literally killed themselves. It was a mass suicide of almost 1,000 people. Charlie Manson, you've probably heard of. He got some young people to commit murder. So while I was in school, I also was fearful of cults and captivated by them. And I think most people feel that way. They're kind of scary and intriguing at the same time. Like, how did they get you? How do they snag a person from their life and brainwash them and make them, be a zombie? So it always kind of stayed with me. And when I got into my training and my degree program, I learned that it wasn't quite, the way that we commonly thought about it. They didn't have magical powers. But I started working in settings where we worked with cult survivors, and I've worked in other settings as well. I'm not just a cult specialist. It's just something I've been interested in and done quite a bit of. Not sure if that answers your question.
Sure, it definitely does. May I ask, so how long have you been a practicing psychologist at this point?
Well, I've been working, starting with internships since the 80s, mid 80s. Yeah.
I see. So obviously you have a great deal of experience. One thing I wanted to inquire about is the term cult, because, a lot of people feel that is a very inflammatory term, and it does cause certain reactions and emotions to come about. So I wanted to ask you, what is it that makes a cult, let's say from the opinion of someone like yourself?
Yeah, it's any religion I don't like. That's kind of the way, it's sort of that way, I think, for a lot of people. And you never get anywhere saying you're in a cult to anybody. Right. But generally speaking, it is a religious organization, a new religion, typically, although there are exceptions. Christianity was a cult when it started out. Probably Islam and Judaism were cults, no doubt, when they started out. or certainly were perceived so, and everything is within a social context. So something that's a cult here might not be a cult in some other place. It would be the way everybody is. So a cult typically is formed around a powerful figure or a powerful idea or construct. So in some cults, you have that one leader whose word is inviolate. Anything he says is absolute truth, and nobody, or she sometimes, can dispute it. In a group such as Jehovah's Witness, which is generally considered to be a cult, you have the idea of Jehovah, which is kind of interesting because it was a misunderstanding of the translation, a mistranslation of the name Yahweh, apparently. That's my understanding. So you have this structure of men in the group who sort of take the place of being a pope or high priest or something. Pardon me, I'm low on sleep, so my voice is a little off. And within that hierarchical structure, you have these men who really can't be argued with. So when someone is kicked out of the group, be it, I don't want to start naming other groups, but you can use your imagination. Sure. Typically, they face this tsunami of disapproval. And at first, if they're pushed out, they're desperately trying to stay in, and they make promises, and they're these behaviors that are required of them that are really cruel. It's cruel, really. And if they're fortunate, they fail at that, and they're thrown out in the cold of the terrifying world of uncertainty, which is the way everything is. Cults are comforting. They're black and white. They have answers to everything. They have behavioral descriptors. You don't have to be faced with the existential angst of life. You're in a cult because all the answers are there. And if you are intelligent and you start questioning, then that's a big problem. So you have this structure that has a lot of black and white thinking, that wields power over its members, that exerts thought control. You're not allowed to think independently. You have to go to the scriptures or to the mantras or speaking in tongues. It's a group that tells you are unacceptable the way you are, the way you came naturally, that you were born of original sin is an idea in Christianity because of what some ancestors did. But what court on the planet would do that? That's terribly cruel. If we said in Iraq they have a court that they're hanging people because of what their great grandparents did, everyone would be outraged and it would be awful and terrible. Well, the idea of Adam and Eve is that they violated the law of seeking knowledge. They weren't supposed to, and you deserve to literally die for that. What an awful concept. To me, that's unthinkable to tell someone that you were born in sin, the idea of original sin. And all the cults do that. They tell people they're not good enough the way they are. You need the leader. You need the structure of the group. You need the prescription of the political party. You need whatever we have to offer that will make you acceptable. However, once you start meeting those criteria, they actually aren't enough. We need more from you. It's a bottomless pit. It's like a black hole of need of consuming a person. And I sometimes, when I'm listening to people talk about what they went through, I think this is soul murder. It really sounds like it. And I'm just so impressed with the resilience of people, not only to survive within that structure in whatever way they have to, but to get themselves out, which is the most terrifying thing. It keeps you up at night. It wakes you up at 3 a.m. with, maybe they were right. Maybe I am going to hell. Maybe, or there's an earthquake. Maybe it's, Armageddon or tribulation or whatever, their term is within their system.
Sure.
So it's a high control group. It controls what you think. It controls your relationships. It controls your time. You have to go to services on these times. You have to pioneer as a JW. You have to give your time, your wealth, your intelligence, surrender your questioning, surrender your independence as a person to this construct, this person, this idea, this group of people, this structure like Watchtower. It's a one person, but it functions as one person. It really does. It functions as an unreasonable, angry tyrant. And one of the interesting things about a lot of these groups is that there's mystery around what happens to the money. So you have these faith healers on TV who have jets, and I think there was one recently, it hit the social media, he wanted his 5th or 6th, jet. So he was asking for money, and they justify it by being outraged that you would ask. And it works with their followers, their followers think, well, he has so much on him, and, pastor we should do this for him. It is astounding. And once a person steps back and gets out of it, they begin to look at it, they think, how did I ever buy that?
Right.
How did I allow myself to be subjugated to such cruel tyranny? Well, it's terrifying to understand the profound truth that no matter how many people are around us, we are alone. You are alone in your head, Fifth. I am alone in my head, and I can extend love and kindness, which I really try to do. But ultimately, we are alone, and we are born alone, and we die alone, no matter who attends us, no matter how many are there. And to not be in the cloister of that group is a cold and terrifying thing until you realize that's the human, that's what we experience because we have self-awareness and so forth. And that's okay. That's part of the deal. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know, speaking from experience, that is something that you go through once you're, finally on the outside looking in and you realize just how dependent you were on that structure. And it helps if you're able to, do some research and get some of this knowledge that you're explaining for us to kind of help to diagnose, the situation in which you currently find yourself. I wanted to ask you specifically as far as dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses in your practice. I understand you say you were interested in cults in general, but as it specifically pertains to Jehovah's Witnesses, have you worked with current and or former Jehovah's Witnesses in your practice?
I've never worked with current Jehovah's Witnesses. I've worked with some Jehovah's Witnesses who left. I haven't worked with Jehovah's Witnesses who had just left just right now. That's a different. There are people that just do that. People who are freshly out and they're just bleeding. So after that, then I work with them for usually a pretty extended period of time. So I like to see someone who is just adapting to life outside of the cult. So they've left it. They've gotten through that initial period of shock. It's like it's a triage, and then they're constructing their life. And I like to be accessible quite a bit. And it's not the same as fostering dependence. These people are really hurting. Their whole worldview and view of self has been structured around that cult. And 50 minutes once a week, I'm just not adequate. That's why I love your videos. You're my #1 recommended channel because a couple of reasons. One is I like the questions you ask, and you are a great picture of okayness. People look at you and look, he looks good. He's asking intelligent questions. He has this channel Wow, that really gives people hope. The other thing is, I haven't yet, and maybe I will, but I haven't yet heard from your people that you interview that they've gone into another cult, because that happens, where you'll look on YouTube, and so I'm very cautious, and I say just watch his videos. YouTube will give you everything. Mm-hmm. So you get someone who says, I left this cult and now I found the true religion. Mm-hmm. Well, there are 4,200 religions today. Mine is not the only one. Nobody's is. The thing that they need to understand is that love and respect of self is where they need to start. That needs to be their religion. Mm-hmm. And so far, I haven't heard interviews. I haven't heard all your interviews where someone said, well, now that I've found, whatever it is, that's actually the true religion. So I was going to hell because I was Jehovah's Witness. And I'm like, oh, great. That's just more of the same. Right. So I feel like yours, from what I've seen, they're safe.
Well, I definitely appreciate you saying that. It's always good to hear people's observations as to, what it is that works as far as videos that I put out. And I'm sure, the same could be said about a lot of activists. And it's interesting what you say about, leaving this organization, this cult, and, going to another one. People do, as I'm sure people make all kinds of decisions when they leave Jehovah's Witnesses. But I think what you said is very key. The first thing is being able to look at yourself. I forgot exactly how you worded it. You said respect for yourself is where you should start. And yes, go ahead.
No.
And I think that's exactly, what it's supposed to be, because otherwise, regardless of what belief system you subscribe to at that point, you may just be continuing the same pattern. But just with a different name and a different, face. So, I think that's very important, what you're mentioning. One thing that very often gets asked, whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses or any other group, sometimes I'll get comments of people who haven't experienced this and don't really understand psychologically how one could even enter into such a group. What would you say is the answer to the question, how can cults, or how can groups such as these get smart people to join, right? So what I think I would like to discuss with you is, you have two categories, right? You have a category of people who have come in on their own, maybe in their late teens, or maybe as an adult, and then later perhaps we can go into the category of those who were born in, and kind of what the effects that they experience. So dealing with the first category, what would you say is the appeal for most people when they're choosing to join a religion or join a group such as the Jehovah's Witnesses?
That's a great question. And that's the most often asked question, obviously, because the question is, how did that happen to me? And before I forget, in addition to videos like yours, there are lots of books that help people so that they can probably get from books everything they could get from me. It's just that you don't know where to look in the book, so I'm talking to you. I know that chapter 7 of that book would help. But the best treatments for the recovery are the cognitive or cognitive behavioral treatments. If people are looking for someone, and there are a lot of people that are really good at helping. But honestly, listening to you interview people, reading books, that can be adequate. That can be enough for a person. And time, which is so painful and difficult when I'm trying to live minute to minute in a sphere of panic that was created by my severing myself from the cult that was everything. So how do smart people join the cult? People are smart. And that's always the question, like, what is wrong with me that I joined them? And as time goes by, you see this sort of arc of anger and resentment, which are totally appropriate and understandable. And there's a lot of research that says cult survivors go through the stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified. Anger, denial, although there are 5 stages. So, and you don't go stepwise through them. You swirl around in them if you're facing grieving for someone or your own imminent death, and also getting out of a cult. It's really similar because it is a death. It is a death of that person you were, and you're actually killing that person because that person was killing you. That your pain got to the point where even if they were right and I'm going to hell for this, I have to leave this group because I'm suffocating, I'm drowning. How does a smart person get into that? Like my friend's older brother, who's very, very smart. We have a lot of research about that. One of the things that worries me a little is that in times of social and political upheaval, you see a spike in cults. And that's going to happen now. It's probably happening now. It's very hard to count cults. And now with the internet, it's just impossible because there are a lot of cults through the internet that people can get themselves indoctrinated or brainwashed, whatever term you wish to use, into that group and that thinking. But there are thousands, tens of thousands. And when you're looking at a person, often young people are really great for getting into cults because young people, by the very nature of being young, they are insecure and unsure about a lot of things. And one of the things I do when I lecture on this is an exercise where I get the names of the attendees, the people who are going to be in the lecture. And I write up a zodiac thing, a personality profile, astrological profile. And it's the same for everyone. And it says, you don't always tell everyone exactly what you think. Even your closest friends don't know every thought you have. Sometimes you wish you'd made some other decisions. Sometimes you procrastinate. You wish that you could go back in time. And it's just different things that everybody feels, especially if they're young. And so I put their name on each one, and I pass them out very carefully, or have somebody pass them out and say, don't, this is your. I had your personality profile drawn up by a professional. I'm a professional, and don't show it to the person next to you. This is it's quite private. Don't, you've had sex with people you're not all that interested in, some embarrassing things in there. Right. I want you to read your personality profile. It's very private. Don't let anyone else see it because you might be embarrassed. So they read it. And then I get feedback and they say, I never believed in astrology, but then I read this. This is exactly true. This is me. This is, I'm astounded at how accurate it is. And then I say, well, let's do an experiment, trade with someone. And then they see that it was a sham. But we're so gullible. We're so easy to persuade. So I could have had them thinking I was an expert in astrology. And if I had no conscience, I would have a lot more money right now, because all of these groups take human nature. And I like to tell people, read the ancient Greek philosophers that were the big school in Lyceum in 500 AD, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and those guys. They said the same things that I say now and that cult leaders say. And I have knowledge and training and experience, and a lot of cult leaders don't have that, but they just are good observers of human nature. And we're a naturally tribal species. We have to be for our survival. We got off our front limbs about 2 million years ago to use them to manipulate objects, and that's a huge sacrifice in flight. We're very slow. We can't fly. We can't really bite an animal. Our defenses are terrible. All we have is our fabulous brain and each other. So we survive collectively, and we're naturally tribal. And I think we're naturally xenophobic because we're in a little tribe and we're living in a cave or something. That new person coming over could be scouting, so his group can kill all of us and steal our goats and take our children and young women. They would have killed me. I'm 64. Well, I wouldn't be alive still, but it's in our DNA. It's in our brains primitively to be tribal, to be collective, to be in a group. There's safety and security in that. And if I launch out of high school into the world, and I'm not sure what I want to do, and I picked a major, but I don't know if I want to do that the rest of my life. I don't know if I want to marry that thing. And I'm not sure about a lot of things. And I can't tell my parents because they know that I should be an accountant. And I always said I would. But I really feel like I'd rather be a sculptor. But I'm terrified to tell them. And, the swirls of insecurity. And my boyfriend's great, but I'm not so sure. So someone says, come with me to this meeting, and we have this, you won't believe what they'll say. This leader says this great stuff, or we have this group that, whatever the cell is. For the Watchtower, it can't be those tracks because they're ridiculous. But the people coming to the door, I'm at home and I'm feeling just really down, and they caught me at that moment. And they came to the door, because the stereotype about JWs is they're those annoying people that come to your door. There are lots of jokes about what to say when they come, oh, honey, the human sacrifice is here, and all of that. But I'm all alone, and I'm feeling insecure and sad, and I'm not sure of anything. And then these people come, and they're so sweet. And they tell me they have the answers. And I'm in that mode where I'll listen to them. I will listen to those answers. And it's so comfortable and easy. And typically, cults will love bomb you. They're just so nice to you, and you don't get the full view for a while. Some cults are not that way, like Est. Est is a group that is abusive at the get-go, and you're just, like, you're not good enough. I can straighten you out. I can make you better. I can make you 300% what you are now. Okay. Beat the hell out of me. It's like a psychological boot camp, except it's terrible. And I don't even know if Est is around anymore. I haven't seen an Est survivor for a while. But smart people are always looking for answers. And smart young people your brain when you're young is launching you into a separation from your parents and everything you've known and the culture you've been in. It's called separation individuation, if there's a name for that phase. And so here's something that's really different. So I'm going to give it a go because I know I'm smart. Smart people know they're smart. I know that you're highly intelligent. I can tell just by the way you talk and so forth. And 100 languages. So that's you. That person is susceptible in a really interesting way because if we're smart, we're really confident in our intelligence. So the last thing we would expect ourselves to do is get sucked into a cult. So we feel like we're inoculated by intelligence, but in fact, we're not. We're not even inoculated by past cult experience. It's an interesting thing because you end up questioning, how did I fall for that stupid business? How did I believe that rubbish? How could I have done that to myself? And there's an anger at the group, and then there's this anger itself. How did that happen? It could happen to anybody because we're tribal and we're gullible, and I can convince people in minutes to pay me to do their horoscope. If I had no conscience. We're a very, very gullible species. And the only way to inoculate ourselves is through knowledge. And that's why I like those Greek philosophers, because you can say, well, hey, they had great truths, and all they did was teach. They didn't start a religion. In fact, one of them had to kill himself because he was speaking against the religion. I forgot which one it was. Aristotle, I think. But we live in a group context. We define ourselves within a group context to launch into a world there's so many options. There's no role defined for you. You have to define you, which is terrifying. How comforting to have someone help me, to have someone say, this deity, whatever you want to call that deity, has a plan for you. We'll help you find that plan for you. We know what the plan is. And then it becomes this terrible thing of, you're not good enough. You're actually failing. Do you even love Yahweh? You're not showing your love for Yahweh. I show my love for Yahweh by being cruel to others. It's awful, but that's really how it is. Smart people drink all the time. I think the older you get, the less likely you are, because you've just seen more life, and especially my generation, because we saw this flurry of cults after Vietnam, after Watergate, after our turmoil of the 60s and 70s. Civil rights movement was huge, and there were cults that flourished after that, because we're trying to redefine ourselves as a nation. And God forbid I should have to spend years figuring out whom I am. Much easier to have someone tell me for me. Yeah, smart people join cults. Yeah.
Amazing insights. I feel like I'm in a session myself. Honestly, just all of the things that I'm learning from what you're saying. It's very, very incredible. As I mentioned before, in an effort to just kind of show what happens to someone who is born in, right? We've kind of talked about what makes an individual, especially a smart individual, as we're saying, susceptible to wanting to be a part of that. But what is the experience like for someone, let's say someone like myself, but there are so many who are born in. I feel like at this point it's pretty much an established fact that any growth seen within Jehovah's Witnesses, by and large, is from children of Jehovah's Witnesses. Right. So because that's so common, and, even years past, that's been so common, how would you differentiate that from the experience of someone who comes in later in life?
I think that's probably one of the best questions a person can ask, because the most important thing I feel like a therapist can do with cult survivors, and I've been trying to think of a word other than survivor, because it implies a victimhood, and I don't like that. But I haven't come up with one. And I looked in the thesaurus and I couldn't find it. But I don't have all the best words, so who knows? I like to just tell these people, here's what happens to everybody when they're in that situation, because that gives such relief. And Margaret Singer, who was really the first in-depth researcher of what cults do to people, that was her focus, was just tell them what it happened to them. And because I am heavy on the neurology side of psychology and the cognitive side, I like to think of what happens to the brain, physically to the brain. So if you're a young adult and you join, and adolescence psychologically is a period that extends to about 25, 26 years old, sometimes 30 years old, because we're talking about physical brain development, the frontal areas that have decision making and all that, judgment. So that's a period of time that one is quite susceptible to cults. Being raised in one, born into one, or brought in as a young child, that is an extra layer of harm to a person. I don't see people as being damaged. I see injuries. The thing that happens is, so your brain, you're born with all your neurons, or almost all your neurons, and there are maybe 100 billion. There are disagreements on exactly how many neurons you have, and you have 100 trillion connections between your neurons. I'm sorry. So you're born with this giant head for a baby. Like if you made a baby 6 feet tall, it would look like your space alien drawing, right? Like this huge head. Mm-hmm. But their head is actually pretty small compared to yours. Well, the growth of the brain after birth is all in the connections between the neurons. So you're born with neurons that are like cell phones that aren't, they're just sitting in the store. There's no service. And through life experience, and also through genetic programming, they connect with each other. So you get, your senses get wired in and all that. But the important part, the human part, the parts where our personality and our decision making and our memory and all those parts, those are all wiring together through childhood. And within the context of wherever you are. So if I'm born into or brought in as a young child into a group, a high control group, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're very high control. They control your time, your thinking, your money, everything. Your relationships, awful. We had a neighbor when my son was little. I didn't know they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they had a boy his age, and they played for a while, and then all of a sudden, that boy couldn't play. He just couldn't play. I don't know if because they learned I was a psychologist, or there's an age that I never learned. I found out later they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and I thought, okay, well that. The problem with being raised in a group like that is that everything you learned and every part of your brain's wiring is in the context of that group. Everything. So you're little boy, fifth, and you're learning how to make a peanut butter sandwich, and you're in the home of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and your parents talk about Jehovah. And everything is about Jehovah. And you're thinking, I want to be baptized when I'm bigger. I'm going to be baptized and I'm going to be a Bethelite and all that. And my parents are taking me when they're pioneering. I actually never had anybody bring kids with them, but I've heard that sometimes that happens. They don't come to me very much because I don't invite them in. But I'm kind. I just say I'm not. Yeah. So you're learning how to make that peanut butter sandwich, and your motors of managing how the knife uniquely works in peanut butter. And it's different from the natural peanut butter and the normal kind, the two types of peanut butter. Those are, the texture is different. And with a natural one, you have to sort of stir it up, or you get your parents to because you're little. And how wide the blade is, and the shape of the handle and the friction you have on the handle, and the smell of the peanut butter that wafts up into your face, and the bread, whether you toast it or not, and how the bread can rip from the peanut butter, and the jelly, how it sort of breaks up, and you have to balance it on the blade of the knife. All of those things, there are countless sensory things that have to do with making a peanut butter sandwich. All of that was in the context of Jehovah's Witnesses. Every aspect of your being has that sort of cloud over it. And so you can so easily be thrown back into some memory of some aspect of it because of your brain is redundantly wired with all of that. And the way it works is your neurons, each neuron doesn't hold one piece of information. They hold several pieces. And how they connect is how they're talking about which kind of bread is less prone to tearing from the peanut butter and so forth. I mean, it's very complicated if you think about it. And the visual field and the angles of the bread and the little crumbs that come off and the edges. I mean, if you think about it, there's a vast amount of data just from making peanut butter. I bet you never thought that much about making a peanut butter sandwich.
Never.
It is. And so all of that, every aspect, every song you've heard, when you learned how to play the piano, when you had a bad cold, when you were mad at your sister, everything is in the context of that. So when you leave, you have a lot of unwiring to do. The wonderful news is that you have the power to physically alter your brain simply by thought. That we actually have powers to change something physical through thought alone, your brain. So you change the wiring of your brain. Your skull, your plates of your skull harden early, when you're still a baby. And you can't grow a bump for learning, Mandarin. you're going to sacrifice some real estate. Your brain only has so much data. It's like a computer hard drive. It's exactly like a computer hard drive, actually. And so whatever other things you learned are archived if you don't bring them up frequently and replaced with new wiring. You teach your brain what you want it to work on and remember and have primed and ready to use simply by exposing it to things. So I tell people, when you have like a habitual thought, like, I'm not good enough, I'm not whatever enough, I'm probably not acceptable to God or Jehovah or Yahweh or, you know, the great maple leaf, whatever the thing is. Well, I like Canada, so I didn't mean to cast aspersions. All of that, those thoughts sort of habitually pop up. And they can pop up when you're making that peanut butter sandwich because you have all of that wiring about that. And you have it connected to everything. You're at the mall and you walk by a Cinnabon and you smell a confection that smells like some cookie your grandmother made. Jehovah's Witnesses, you have a memory. It's very interesting how it works. And so you have to be vigilant for those and say, okay, that is a destructive memory. That's a destructive thought. I reject it. I reject that thought. I am lovable and worthy just the way I am right now. And even if you don't believe it, even if there's part of you that's saying, that's just ridiculous, I'm actually not good enough, it doesn't matter if you believe it. It's the saying it that matters because you literally are rewiring your brain. And that to me is the most wonderful and fascinating part of the whole thing, is that the rest of your life, you can change the physical wiring of your brain to reject those things. And so when I'll do work therapeutically with someone, and they were brought into the group very, very young or born into the group, I like to explain that and tell them, you will have years and probably the rest of your life, there'll be things that pop up and remind you of this thing, you know, of this group, of something about it, another terrible element, the church leader who molested me, because, you know, there's a lot of that fortunately has sort of come out among the JWs themselves, that they're talking about. I guess Australia was the first flurry of that information, as far as I know. All of those things that pull me back to that memory of that cult. Oof. And those bad feelings and that memory of how bad it felt, that's when I need to hit it right then. Say, this is a hurtful memory. This is injuring me. I don't accept it. I reject it. I am worthy of love and kindness right now, just the way I am, because you are. And when I first see people, they're wounded. They have these injuries. And so I'm putting plasters on the injuries, and plasters come out, bandages, and they come off. And sometimes they peel them off. Like, I was watching videos about Jehovah, not fifth videos or John Cedar or any of those good ones, but actual, you know, JW type of talk. And so, you know, talk to me about why you did that. Well, I just wanted to know, you know, you have to control that, because sometimes curiosity leads us to, you know, I wonder what they're saying. I wonder what it's like. I wonder, and that's so seductive, but it's harmful. So you have to be a guardian of yourself. That's harmful. You have to be your own National Guard and say, I won't allow that into me because I know it's harmful. And one exercise that really helps, I do not advocate journaling without specific instructions, because journaling can hurt me. If I journal, I'll never be good enough. I'll never be anything. I'll never be good. I'm just making myself worse. I'm ruminating on paper. But if I journal, when Elder so-and-so said this to me, here's how I felt, and write about how you felt. And I reject that now. I do not accept his words. he is like me, a fallible person. I don't have to listen to anything he says because all he wanted to do was control and injure me, which is, I think, what they're doing. And then keep that. And later, if there are feelings of nostalgia around, it certainly wouldn't be around holidays, but about something about JW, get out that notebook and read how you felt. Very instructive. Oh my God, I felt terrible. They made me feel terrible. I will take this insecurity of freedom over the pain and soul murder of controlling my thoughts, of telling me whom I am. They act like they are your mirror. You know, I'm telling you whom you are. How dare anybody do that? That's terrible. That's cruel. It's heartless. It's arrogant. It's inappropriate. And it seems like the most flawed people get the most kick out of doing that to others. That's just an idea I have. I haven't looked at literature on that. But we do have literature on those kind of leaders, and it's not flattering for them.
Yeah, I would imagine it's not. Wow. Yeah, this is a whole lot to consider. I hope that when people view this video, they may view it more than once to be able to just kind of really absorb all of this. You know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about myself, and you know, hopefully others that watch this later will be able to do the same.
That's actually all I want, is for people to think about themselves and love themselves and recognize that the only person who can define whom you are is you. And no one deserves to be in your life unless they appreciate you and they want you to tell them whom you are, not the other way around.
Absolutely. Very well said. So, Alice, I really appreciate you taking time out once again to speak with us. You know, your insights have really been very valuable, and I'm sure many people are going to be able to benefit from listening to those insights. What I would like to ask you at this time is a couple of questions that I generally ask all of my guests. The first question is, what would you say to someone who is beginning to question and hasn't yet made that determination as far as what they're going to do, or if they still believe part of it or something like that? What do you think is important for them to bear in mind?
That's a great question. That's an incredibly painful and terrifying place to be, because that person is trying to find the courage to ask real questions, not the questions that the group has prepared answers for, but meaningful questions of themselves and the world around them. And these groups tend to discourage higher education because they don't want people asking those questions. I would say that you have to think about how you want to spend your life, that you're given this allotment of time, and you know, we don't know how much. The only thing we know is how much time we have had. We don't know how much stretches before us. And I think I worked in palliative medicine, hospice. All my patients were dying, and my job was to help them exit, to say goodbye, to look at that other bookend of life. And the worst thing I think I could hear from somebody at the end of a life is, I realized I squandered myself, my life, my personhood, my intelligence, my desires, my wishes, every aspect of me for someone else's idea of me. That'd be terrible. I never heard that, actually. The only thing I heard about remorse was I should have loved better. And it's sort of sideways to that. I should have hugged and kissed my family more. I should have told my parents or my siblings or my spouse I was proud of them more than fussing at them. I should have not worried about the socks on the floor and scooped up my kids more and hugged them. And I should have loved myself more. And I think for good people, that's a hard concept, the idea of self-love, but it's not selfish. In fact, the person in love with self is the most fun person to be around because they take joy in everything. They say, look at that sunset and taste these wonderful strawberries. They're perfect. And look at this and that. And they have a sense of wonder about the world. I've never seen anyone in a high control group. Well, I can't really say that. I only see people after they've left. So there may be people in high control groups that experience the joy and the humor of life and the wonderful freedom of loving yourself enough to do what's best for you. Because that is the definition of love, is you want what's best for that person. Well, why don't we do that for ourselves as well? So I would say, think about how it makes you feel about you to be in that group. Think about when you're in meetings and when you're getting a dressing down or watching someone else get a dressing down, or when you're asked to do something that's uncomfortable for you or just doesn't feel right, but you make it feel right because you have to, because the leaders of the group said it's right. Well, there's this part of you that says, I don't feel good about this. I don't like this. I don't like what I'm saying to this person or doing to this person. That's your true self talking to you. That's your conscience. It's your own conscience. No one can make your conscience for you. I can't. No one else can. All I do is tell people over and over, you have to find out who you are, and your job is to tell me whom you are and tell other people whom you are, and to fall in love with you. If you want to be a painter, you need to paint. You need to do whatever gives you joy, because I would hate to see you at the end of your life saying, I always wanted to something, but I didn't have the courage, but the group told me not to. That's a tragedy. So I would say, think about how they make you feel about you. Be honest about that. See where you go from there.
Thank you very much for those insights. Those are very useful things for people to think about. And now the second question that I would like to ask you is about those who have already left and who have, even if they haven't actually left the religion, but they've left it mentally, they've come to the conclusion that this is not the only truth, and that there's another way to live life. What would be your advice or your words of wisdom to those individuals?
Well, those are the people that tend to come to me sometimes years after they've left. Mm-hmm. They say, I really feel like I'm stuck. I want to get unstuck. I think that it's human nature in good people to have self-doubt and to distrust our own voice and the things that we think that we should be doing or want to be doing. And, sometimes the thing you should be doing is spending the whole weekend watching movies on Netflix. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Some people think that psychologists say that guilt is a useless emotion. No one should feel guilt. That's not true. If I injure someone intentionally, I should feel guilt. But it's useless guilt. It's guilt that we shouldn't be feeling that is so harmful. So if I feel like, well, I should be, I see my neighbor painting his house, I should go over there and help him paint his house. I'm a bad person if I don't. I just want to watch Netflix movies. We're so kind to other people, but we're not as kind to ourselves. Mm-hmm. So I tell people when they give me sort of a string of, well, I'm, bad in these 7 ways. I say, I want you to tell me exactly how you're bad. Give me the whole thing. And so they'll do this well-practiced string of words, this narrative of how undeserving they are and unworthy they are. And they're they're lazy, they're selfish, they procrastinate, they're too fat, whatever the thing is. And I say, imagine you saying that to someone else. Imagine saying that to your best friend or your mother or your child. Look, I would never say that. Exactly. But that's not true, is it? Because you just said it to you. And you're important. You're special. You are deserving of love. You are a precious child. You deserve all the kindnesses that you would give to someone else. You deserve them for yourself. Spend that weekend watching Netflix. Do it. Enjoy the things that you were given to enjoy. My father's almost 98, and he is one of those people who has always been able to find joy in everything. You can't get that man to complain about anything, which is kind of a problem because I want him to tell me what he wants. But, you know, he has more happiness in his life for it, that he doesn't fault himself. And I've talked to him about this and said, you know, what are your regrets? And he said, well, I have regrets and I have remorse. But I decided when I was in World War II and there were other people really trying to kill me, and I was killing them. He was a lieutenant in the Navy, so he was ordering fire and killing, he said, children of Japan, which is impossible for him to talk about without weeping. It breaks his heart. He says, I saw some of their faces. He said, I just decided that remorse is a special kind of self-injury, and that life injures us enough. Just things happen and we get knocked down in the mud and we have to get up and scrape it off and pick ourselves up and move on. And there isn't always someone there to lend a hand, to help us get up, to help us make it home, limp home. Sometimes we're just sort of battered. And he said, I decided I wasn't going to do that to myself. He's the kindest person. He would never hurt another person. But he said, I didn't want any kind of remorse more than I already have. Everyone collects some amount in life. So I decided I needed to treat myself as kindly as I treat everyone else. And it's a beautiful role model. It is. It's not selfish to take care of yourself. If you're out of that group and you realize that it's not the right thing for you, I know that you have moments of doubt. And I know that there are times that you, when you wake up to pee, some thought comes to your head, or you had a dream and you're flooded with panic. And by the way, dreams, as far as we know, are the product of what was going on in our brains recently. So if you're at the mall, and I guess I like the mall, I actually hate malls, and you are shopping for new trainers and athletic shoes, and you walk by that Cinnabon and you smell that fragrance of your grandmother's cookies, and it's Christmas time, so they have the Christmas music and a tree and maybe a mall Santa, and you get the shoes, and then that night you have a crazy dream that your grandma came in Santa's sleigh wearing shoes and throwing cookies. Well, obviously that dream came from all that, and when we're in a dream, it makes sense within itself because that's how the brain works. So talking about these things or remembering these things or being reminded of something from the JW group or whatever group you're in, and then having a dream, a powerful dream, a terrifying dream, a dream that you wake up convinced you are really going to be killed by God, that God loves you so much, that if you don't love him back in the exact right way out of 4,200 religions, he'll kill you. And you wake up in the middle of the night thinking that makes sense. And you really are on the wrong side of things. And you've done something terrible and you've doomed yourself. You had the dream because you were talking about it and thinking about it that day, or something reminded you of it, or just it's in your head. It's everywhere in your brain. And you're weeding it out by living your authentic life as authentically you, as the person who goes home from work and does watercolor painting, because that's what gives you joy. You should be doing that. Give yourself time. Do not be impatient. Impatience is the biggest problem as far as recovering from this goes. How long will it take? I get asked that. It's an impossible question to answer, but it takes a long time. And it's kind of a lifetime project of pruning and culling and working in the garden. But there's a lot less to do as time goes by. Time is your friend. As long as you tackle those destructive thoughts, those automatic thoughts, those things that come into your head. And the journaling is one way to accomplish that. It can be helpful, but only journaling by countering those destructive thoughts. But you don't have to do that. Not everybody has to do that. Just telling yourself, this is destructive, I don't accept it, I banish it. Just saying that to yourself silently is very powerful and it's very effective over time.
Very good thoughts to keep in mind. I think for anyone, including those who have been out, for a longer period of time, some of us, I know I could speak for myself and say, I've been out for 3 years, but I don't know if all of the healing that I've done, I don't know if I've used the time as wisely, as I was supposed to, as far as, thinking the right things and putting the right things in motion. So it's great to hear those things, not to feel bad about oneself for, what you did or did not do, but rather just so that you can know where you can go from here, to be able to do things more purposefully.
I'm glad you said that. I'm going to stop you.
Sure.
Because using your time wisely can be a self-destructive thing to say to yourself. Let yourself, if you have a week where all you think about is JW and maybe I was wrong, that's okay. Mm-hmm. That's where you need to be then. Just never put that on yourself that, it was, I failed at, working on healing because I capitulated into that thinking.
Sure.
Just say, wow, I guess that's what happened to me this week, but that's okay because I am powerful enough to change my thinking and I'll move on. So be kind and forgiving to yourself.
I'm going to try to do a better job with that from this point forward. Thank you so much. This has been just very eye-opening, very informative. Appreciate the benefit of all of your years of experience, and you're looking into this topic particularly. I'm sure it's something that this audience is going to be very, very grateful for. So again, thank you. We know you have a busy schedule. Thank you for taking time out and speaking with me today.
Thank you. It was fun talking to you, and I want you to enjoy the perfect strawberries.
I appreciate that. Right back at you.